All right, welcome back, everybody. Ready for another deep dive?
Always ready.
Awesome. So today we're looking into something that's been in the news lately. The FDA's ban on red dye number 3.
Oh, yeah. That's caused quite a stir.
It really has. We've been going through a ton of articles and expert opinions, and it seems like there's a real mix of reactions. Some people are totally on board with the ban. Others are saying, hold on, what's the rush?
It is interesting to see how much debate it sparked.
For sure. And that's exactly why we're diving in. We want to figure out why this ban is happening now, what the science actually says about red dye number 3, and what it all means for, well, all of us, really, when we're out there shopping for food.
Makes sense. You know, in a way, this whole thing with one little dye is kind of giving us a peek behind the curtain of how our food gets regulated.
Right. Like it's a bigger story than just red dye.
Definitely.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. The FDA's official reason for the ban is evidence suggesting that red number 3 could cause cancer in lab rats.
Yeah, that's enough to make anyone pay attention. But here's the catch. The FDA's actually known about this potential cancer link since, get this, the 1980s.
The 80s. Wow.
Yeah, so what? The long wait, why ban it now?
That's a good question.
Well, that's where the Delaney Clause comes into play.
Ah, the Delaney Clause. I've heard of that, but honestly, I'm a little fuzzy on the details.
No worries. It's a bit of a legal mouthful. It's a law from way back in 1958, and it basically draws this hard line in the sand. The FDA can't approve any additive, any at all, that's shown to cause cancer in humans or animals. Doesn't matter how small the risk might seem.
Wow, so zero tolerance.
Pretty much. And you got to remember, back in the 50s, food safety was this huge public concern. So the Delaney Clause was kind of like their way of saying, we're not messing around with this.
Interesting. So this clause has been around for decades. It means for all those years, there's been this kind of tug of war between what the Delaney Clause demands and what the science is telling us, which, let's face it, is often messy and always evolving.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, science is rarely a neat and tidy package.
No kidding.
Yeah.
And that's what makes this ban such an interesting case study. The FDA had this evidence about red number 3, but it took them forever to actually do something about it, like officially ban it.
It really makes you think about how they weigh potential risks against, well, everything else, you know?
Yeah, like how do they make those decisions?
Right.
Okay, before we get too deep into the whole regulatory maze, let's take a step back. What even is red dye number 3? I mean, most of us probably just see it as that bright, cheerful red color in our food, but I'm guessing there's more to it than meets the eye.
Oh, there definitely is. Red dye number 3, or if you want to get fancy, erythrocene. It's not just any old red dye. It's synthetic. And get this, it's actually derived from petroleum.
Pull on petroleum, like what we put in our cars.
The very same.
That's kind of freaky.
I know, right? It really shows you how the things we eat can be way more complex than they seem at first glance. And they use this petroleum-derived dye to create that, you know, that super vibrant, almost like fake-looking cherry red you see in a lot of food and drinks.
And it's not just candy and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
I was reading that red number 3 is hiding in some pretty unexpected places.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Think cereals, those bright red cherries you get in cocktails, even some processed meats use it to make them look redder. It's everywhere.
Wow. Didn't realize it was that common.
Okay.
Okay, so we've got a potential cancer link. It's made from petroleum. Are there any other concerns about red dye number 3? I keep seeing articles mentioning possible behavioral issues in children, like hyperactivity.
Right, that's a big one. And to their credit, the FDA did look into it. Well, they basically said there wasn't enough solid evidence to directly link red dye number 3 to hyperactivity in kids.
Okay, so not a done deal, but
Yeah. But here's where it gets really interesting. While the FDA decided not to take action based on that evidence, California went ahead and banned red number 3, and actually a bunch of other artificial dyes too, from food served in their public schools.
interesting. California often seems to be at the forefront of this kind of thing.
They do, and they specifically called out concerns about potential behavioral effects on kids as the reason for the ban.
That makes you wonder. Is this a sign of things to come, like on a national level?
It's definitely possible. We've seen that happen before, where individual states take action and eventually the federal government kind of follows suit. It's almost like states can be testing grounds for new approaches to food safety.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
So we've got this mix of federal regulation, state level action, and all this scientific research going on. It's a lot to keep track of. But what about the companies that actually use red number 3 in their products? How are they reacting to this ban? Are they pushing back, or are they starting to change their tune?
Well, It's a mixed bag, really. Some companies are definitely making their voices heard. They're not happy about the ban.
I can imagine.
Their argument is basically, hey, red num-3 has been used for ages, and it's always been safe. They say the FDA is being too cautious, overreacting to the data.
Yeah, I can see where they're coming from, especially when you consider how long red num-3 has been around. It's been a part of our food culture for so long. There's a sense of familiarity there, you know?
For sure. And that familiarity ties into public perception, which plays a huge role in all of this. I mean, for a lot of people, seeing red num-3 on a label, it doesn't really ring any alarm bells. In fact, for some, it might even bring back good memories, childhood memories of colorful candy and treats and all that.
Right, that nostalgia factor is powerful. But at the same time, there's this growing awareness of the potential downsides of artificial ingredients. People are paying more attention to labels, looking for products that fit with their health goals, all that.
Absolutely. And that shift in what consumers want, that's actually driving a lot of companies to ditch red num-3 and other artificial dyes on their own, even before any regulations come into play.
Really?
Yeah. They're responding to what their customers are asking for, and they're also trying to stay ahead of the game, when it comes to how the public sees them.
It's interesting how consumer demand and what companies decide to do are so intertwined.
Totally. It's like this back and forth, each side influencing the other.
So in this case, it sounds like the trend is moving towards cleaner labels,
Yeah.
more natural ingredients.
Exactly. But let's be real, it's not just about companies being altruistic, right? They're also thinking about their profits, and a natural label, that can be a marketing goldmine. It often means they can charge a higher price.
True. So maybe it's a win-win. Consumers get products that align with their values, and companies find new ways to appeal to those values and stay competitive.
Could be. But that brings up another question. If red num-3 is out, what's taking its place? Are the alternatives any better?
That's a really good point.
Like in some cases, they're just switching to other artificial dyes, red num-40, for example, which at least so far hasn't been as strongly linked to cancer in studies. But remember what we were saying about California banning a bunch of these dyes in schools?
Yeah.
Well, that suggests there might be other things to worry about, even if it's not directly causing cancer.
It's like whack-a-mole. Get rid of one dye and another one pops up with its own set of potential issues.
Yeah, it can feel that way.
So what's the answer? Do we need to, completely rethink how we use food coloring?
It's tricky. I mean, on one hand, we've been using artificial dyes to make food look more appealing for a long time. It's become pretty normal. But then, on the other hand, there's more and more evidence suggesting these dyes might not be as harmless as we thought.
Right, it's a tough balance to strike.
So, what does all this mean for us as consumers? We can read labels, sure, but it's hard to keep up with all the research and all the changing regulations. How do we make good choices when the information is constantly shifting?
Well, that's where the idea, the precautionary principle comes in. Oh yeah, you mentioned that earlier.
Right, it basically says, if there's even a chance something could be harmful, we should play it safe, even if we don't have absolute proof.
Better safe than sorry. But what does that actually look like, practically speaking?
Well, think of it like this. Imagine you're driving on a winding road at night, it's dark, and you see a sign that says, danger, falling rocks, what do?
Probably slow down, be extra cautious.
Exactly. Yeah. Even if you haven't seen any rocks fall yourself, you're taking precautions just in case, right?
Yeah, makes sense. So bringing that back to food, it means being more aware of what we're eating, especially ingredients that have potential risks, even if the science isn't 100% certain yet.
Exactly. It's about asking questions, staying informed, and making choices that feel right for you. It's not about cutting out all processed food or freaking out about every single ingredient. It's more about being aware and making conscious choices about what we put into our bodies.
I like that. So this whole red num-3 ban, it's not just about one particular dye, is it? It's about how we approach food safety in general, how we assess risk, and what role regulations play in protecting public health. It's about the choices we make as individuals and how those choices can add up to something bigger. But what about that bigger picture? Where do we go from here? What's next for food additives and regulations? Feels like this is just the tip of the iceberg, This whole deep dive into red dye num-3 has really got me thinking about all the stuff we eat and how it's regulated.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that food, it's not just what's on your plate, it's tied to so much. Science and culture, the economy, even our own values.
Absolutely. And as we're wrapping up here, I keep thinking about what you said before about how this conversation is just getting started. So what does that mean, in the real world? What's coming next for food additives and all these regulations?
Well, I think one thing we can probably expect is that all these artificial food dyes, they're going to be under a microscope now. Yeah, this red number 3 ban, it could be a real turning point. It set a precedent, and there are tons of consumer groups already pushing for action on other dyes that might be risky health-wise.
Like a domino effect. One dye goes down, and then suddenly everyone's looking at all the others, wondering what else might be lurking.
Right. And we might even see a shift in, who has to prove what when it comes to these additives.
What do you mean?
Well, right now, it's mostly up to the companies to prove their additives are safe, right?
Yeah.
The FDA kind of waits for them to show their homework.
Makes sense.
But there's this movement building to flip that using that precautionary principle we talked about. So instead of assuming an additive is safe until proven otherwise, companies would have to prove it's not harmful before it even gets allowed in our food.
Wow, that's a pretty big change. I wonder how the food industry would handle that.
It would be a big shift for sure, but honestly, I think a lot of companies are already kind of moving in that direction anyway. They're seeing how consumer demand is changing, realizing that using ingredients people see as risky, that can actually hurt their brand.
Right.
So they're getting ahead of the curve, phasing out artificial dyes and other controversial stuff, even before any new rules come down the pike.
So it's like consumer demand is driving the change, and companies are adapting to stay in the game.
Exactly. It's kind of this feedback loop where everyone benefits. Consumers get what they want, and companies get to be seen as leaders, the good guys. But I think we'll also see a surge in food tech innovation.
Oh, how so?
Well, as the demand for natural alternatives keeps growing, companies are going to be scrambling to find ways to create those bright colors and intense flavors people expect, but without using all of those synthetic additives.
That's actually pretty exciting. So maybe this red dye Nuntra 3 ban is like a catalyst. It'll spark a whole wave of creativity in the food world.
Could be. And it shows how these seemingly small things, like banning one little dye, they can ripple out and create bigger changes over time.
It's a good reminder that our choices really do matter. Like, by being informed, reading labels, supporting companies that align with our values, we're sending a message to the whole food industry, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're saying we care about what's in our food, and we're willing to put our money where our mouths are.
Absolutely. It's easy to feel overwhelmed with all the info out there, but ultimately, we have the power to shape the future of food. This whole red dye num 3 thing has been eye-opening, but it's also got me feeling hopeful. It shows even small changes can make a big difference, and our voices as consumers, as citizens, they really do count.
That's a great point. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a question. Now that you know more about red num 3 and the whole world of food additives, how will you approach your own food choices? Will you be looking at those labels a little differently when you're at the store? Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and make those food choices count. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.